In the second quarter of the 15th century, the 100 Years' War saw a radical turning point as the French succeeded in stopping the English expansion in the Loire Valley. Then, thanks to a newly created professional army and an alliance with powerful Burgundy, the French army completely liberated northern France. In August 1451, the English lost the territory located in southern France, which they had held for several centuries. The locals were dissatisfied with the high taxes levied by the King of France and revolted, supported by the English troops. On the 17th of July 1453, the decisive battle between the English and French armies took place near the town of Castillon. On the morning of the 17th of July, the vanguard of the English army, consisting of 500 men-at-arms and 800 mounted archers, approached Castillon. To the north of the besieged town was the priory of Saint-Laurent, which was occupied by 800 French archers. The bulk of the French army was in a fortified camp on the banks of the Libourne River. To the north, the Breton men-at-arms and de Chabannes' mounted detachment were in position. These units covered the main forces from the rear, blocking the narrow passage between the forest and the river. The French army totalled 8,000 men, of whom 3,000 were cavalry, 800 free archers, 1,200 Breton horsemen, and the remainder consisted of infantry and artillerymen. There were about 300 different firearms in the camp, ranging from hand cannons to bombards. The English army numbered about 9,000 men, of whom 1,000 were cavalry, 4,000 archers and 4,000 infantry. The French archers were not known for their training and discipline. Probably for this reason they forgot to set up a guard and did not notice the English approaching the abbey. As soon as the warriors of the vanguard realised that Saint-Laurent was occupied by the enemy, they immediately rushed to the attack. Caught by surprise, the archers scattered. Only the commander with a small group of soldiers made a heroic resistance. Delighted with their easy victory, the English occupied the abbey and settled down to rest, much to the delight of the soldiers. The storerooms of St. Florent held large stores of excellent wine and provisions. John Talbot, pleased with the successful start of the battle, decided to wait for the approach of the whole army and ordered to postpone the attack of the main enemy forces for the next day. The commander wanted to celebrate the first victory over the enemy. The soldiers excitedly uncorked bottles of fine wines from southern France and drank the marvellous drink with relish. Soon, scouts returned to the abbey and reported that the French camp was moving large forces. Then, the commandant of Castillon himself came to Talbot. He said that from the city walls you can see large clouds of dust over the enemy camp, and most likely the enemy army is leaving the battlefield. John Talbot, wishing to intercept the French on the march, immediately gave the order to move towards the enemy's camp without waiting for the approach of all units and artillery. However, the assumptions of the scouts and the commandant proved to be erroneous. In their haste to pass on important messages, they did not bother to make sure of the validity of their conclusions. The French army remained in place behind the fortifications of the camp, and dust clouds rose because of the movement of a huge herd of horses. To keep the animals out of the way during the battle, the command decided to send them east to a safe place. The main part of the English army moved on foot along the road along the river. John Talbot himself rode on a white horse. From the armour he wore only a red brigandine. The fact is that some time ago he had been taken prisoner, and the French had agreed to release him on condition that he gave his word not to take part in hostilities. However, taking advantage of the ambiguity of the words he used during his oath, he interpreted them as if he meant that he would not wear armour in battle. The second detachment moved northwards to attack the French camp from the rear. The squad was small in number as it had to manoeuvre on a narrow piece of land between the river and the forest. In the meantime, the main force approached the camp and deployed in battle order consisting of 3 detachments. Making sure that the soldiers took their positions, Earl of Shrewsbury gave the order to attack. The English unfurled the banners of the King, St. George and the Holy Trinity with cries of Talbot, moved into the attack. The French stood silently behind the fortifications, waiting for the moment when the enemy entered the zone of effective fire of firearms. 300 barrels of various calibers were waiting for their time. No European army had ever met in a field battle with such firepower. There was everything that stood in the arms of medieval armies, from light guns to bombards. Warriors watching the approaching armoured mass calmly waited for the order. They were completely different from the undisciplined knights of the times of the Battle of Poitiers and Agincourt. Most of the defence was made up of professional soldiers, well trained and disciplined. Having finally decided that the English were close enough, the commander gave the order to open fire. The air was torn by the unheard-of rumble of cannon, and the battlefield was enveloped in clouds of thick gunpowder smoke. Dozens of cannonballs rained down on the dense formation of the English. One accurate hit could hit a dozen soldiers at once. Artillery by the middle of the 15th century reached a fairly high level of development. For field guns were developed wheeled carriages, which facilitated manoeuvring on the battlefield, and also allowed to dampen the recoil, thereby increasing the life of the carriages. The introduction of the horizontal guidance mechanism significantly increased the accuracy of firing under a moving target, significantly increasing the value of the gun in field combat. While improvements in casting technology made it possible to increase the reliability of the guns and speed up the manufacturing process, handheld firearms also began to improve and due to their armor-piercing capabilities began to gain popularity among warriors. During this period, it usually consisted of a wooden stick to which a miniature gun barrel was attached. The weapon was loaded from the muzzle, and the shot was fired with a pre-lit, smouldering wick, which was slipped into a small hole in the back of the barrel. The cannonballs penetrated the dense formation of the English, leaving wide gaps in the battles. However, the English soldiers, inspired by the presence of their beloved commander, did not waver, and continued to persistently move forward. Having reached the fortifications, the soldiers with a fierce shout rushed to the assault. The air was filled with the clang of metal, the inhuman roar of the fighting men, the groans of the wounded and the death rattle of the dying, all enveloped in thick clouds of gunpowder smoke. John Talbot galloped between the battles, encouraging the fighters, the enthusiastic English not sparing themselves with fierce climbing on the fortification, trying to break through the gap in the defence. However, the French did not yield to the enemy bravery, and steadfastly fought without retreating a step. In the end, the attack collapsed, and the English were unable to break through the defences and fell back. By this time, some backward English units had drawn up to the battlefield, and Talbot immediately threw them into the attack. The fortifications were again engaged in hand-to-hand fighting, and again the attackers, unable to succeed, were forced to withdraw. The attacks were repeated again and again as fresh forces approached. The English, in spite of their fatigue, were turning back towards the French camp, which was spewing deadly fire. Reinforced by the approaching detachments and encouraged by the calls of their beloved commander, the soldiers rushed forward, towards death, through a field strewn with the bodies of dead and dying comrades. In impotent rage, the soldiers threw themselves at the fortifications, trying in vain to break through the enemy's defences, and each time the English, having failed, fell back. The ground in front of the camp was covered with heaps of bodies, which increased with each new onslaught. Seeing that the English were beginning to run out of steam, the French command ordered the reserve cavalry to attack the enemy from the flanks. 1,200 Bretons advanced towards the enemy's right flank, while de Chabannes' detachment went round to the left. The French command, noticing the hesitation in the ranks of the enemy, gave the order for a general counterattack. The soldiers leaving the fortification rushed at the enemy. At the same time, the cavalry struck from the flanks. At this time, a significant event occurred that hastened the inevitable defeat of the English army. A cannonball struck John Talbot's horse, crushing the Earl of Shrewsbury's leg. The horse collapsed dead, crushing the rider. The English warriors saw the commander fall to the ground, struck by the enemy's cannonball, and became confused. Several dozen Englishmen, wishing to protect their beloved commander, surrounded John Talbot. Around the helplessly lying Earl of Shrewsbury began a brutal chopping. The detachment with difficulty held on, fighting off the advancing French, but the forces were unequal. The ranks of the defenders gradually melted under the numerous blows of the enemy. Finally, having killed every single man, including Talbot's son, the French reached the commander. The Earl of Shrewsbury desperately tried to shout over the noise of the battle, promising the enemy a large sum of money in exchange for his life. But the soldiers, heated by the battle, did not hear him, and the archer Michel Perounin cut down Talbot with a few blows. From that moment, the morale of the English army faded, and the shocked warriors fled the battlefield. The English lost about 4,000 men killed. 1,500 warriors took refuge in Castillon. Some soldiers ran across the ford and some of them drowned. About 4,000 soldiers returned to Bordeaux. Eventually the French captured all Guyenne. The Battle of Castillon was the last battle of the 100 Years' War. The news of the defeat shocked the King of England. When he learnt of the results of the battle, he went mad and remained in this state for about a year, which led to a crisis of power and a bloody civil war in England. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.